welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, this Monday evening. As always, we have a packed show for you, and our top story is, in fact, from India. Let's get started. India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has said the West is not the bad guy, as it is not flooding Asian and African markets with goods on a massive scale, and there is a need to get over the syndrome of seeing it in a negative way. In an interview to a Malayalam news channel, Jaishankar also made it clear that he was not batting for the West. He said, and I quote, "It is not the West which is flooding Asia and Africa with goods on a massive scale. I think we need to get over the syndrome of the past that the West is the bad guy. And on the other side are the developing countries. The world is more complicated. The problems are much more complicated than that." The minister was asked whether Chinese President Xi Jinping did not attend the G20 Summit in New Delhi because he did not want India to be seen as the leader of the global South. In response, Jaishankar said the reasons were up for speculation. The foreign minister added that the issue today is the building up of a strong sense over the last 15 to 20 years over the inequities of globalization, where countries see their products, manufacturing and employment come under stress due to their markets being flooded by cheap goods. An indirect but unmistakable reference to China's trade and economic policies. He said this underlying resentment and the pain of those countries regarding the global economy was already building up for the last 15 to 20 years, and the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine conflict have resulted in prices of energy and food items soaring. Therefore, there is a sense of anger building up in countries about them being used as an extractive resource to fuel the economy of another nation. And the West is not to blame for that. That's what Dr. Jaishankar said while clarifying that he wasn't batting for the West. He emphasized that in today's globalization, there is a concentration of manufacturing that is being leveraged and subsidized and was impacting economies of various countries. The External Affairs Minister also commented on the success of India's G20 Summit, saying India is a different country now with a different level of confidence and a different leadership. And the manner in which G20 was conducted has benefited the country. He said the summit showed that the agenda does not have to be decided by the West or by the P5 or by one or two countries, and that India can shape it too. By becoming the voice of the global South and bringing 125 nations together, we straightaway shaped the agenda, he said. All right, so to understand the import of these statements that have been made by India's foreign minister, let's now go across to Ramakrishna Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Global Lens. It's always great to have you on the show, Sri. What do you make of what Dr. Jaishankar has said? I mean, he really didn't have to take any names there. It is so obvious the reference is to China.
Oh, absolutely, Neha, there's no doubt about it. So let's look at what's really happened ever since globalization began, let's say in the early 80s. So in 1981, the poverty rate in Africa, which is defined as people making less than $2 a day, was roughly the same as the rest of the world, which is at about 43%. So in 30 years, Africa has come down to about 35, 36%, but the rest of the world is down to about 5%. So what's happened is, while in 1981, the proportionate rate of poverty in Africa versus the rest of the world was like, pretty much same. In 30 years, this is the gap that's emerged between, Africa and rest of the world, which is like Africa is still 7 times poorer compared to rest of the world. So when our foreign minister talks about the angst, the distress that African countries are witnessing, and the context of them bringing into G20 and India becoming the voice, and these African countries looking at India as a success story, as one of us who has managed to do things, not just grow economically, not just become advanced scientifically in terms of its own space capabilities and everything. He is absolutely bang on. So now, Neha, the question to ask is, why is it that, while East Asian countries manage to gain advantage from globalization. China, India, all of us benefit from globalization, but the African countries did not. So one of the reasons, of course, is that African countries were exploited largely for their natural resources, minerals, and other things. So they were not able to export value-added goods. Therefore, they remained basically exporters of raw materials, which don't fetch you any economic value addition compared to, let's say, China, which imported all these raw materials and exported them back to the world, right? So that is one big reason. Now, there are some other reasons which are specific to Africa and African countries, Neha, which is since they focused on purely export of raw materials by and large, their economic activity did not grow as much. So there was no trickle down of wealth that happened to its people. There was no infrastructure buildup. There was no investment in capacity development of people. And unfortunately for the people of Africa, the wonderful people of Africa, the regimes which seem to have been in power over the last several decades, many of them tend to be corrupt, dictatorial, and focused only on their own good rather than the good of the people. So China has obviously gone into this environment with its checkbook and exploited the natural resources of these countries, straddled them with huge debt, and therefore now brought them to a situation where they are unable to actually repay the debt which China has saddled them on with. So therefore, there is a lot of resentment, anger of having been shortchanged because of this globalization over the last 30 years, Neha. And the world, this part of the world, the African part of the world, is looking to someone like India, basically as a country, as a leader, who's not just fair, who's not just cognizant of their interest and wants to take them along, but also as a growing superpower which doesn't employ the same policies, the same hegemonistic policies that China does. So that is what I think our foreign minister, Mr. Jaishankar, is trying to hint without actually saying that who's the problem, who's the root cause of the problem for all these 3 decades, Neha.
Absolutely. Like I said, he really didn't have to name names. But fact of the matter is, as you pointed out, Sri, that, China's debt diplomacy has been a matter of concern for many years now. How, so many countries in the region have sort of fallen into this debt trap, some of them have ended up becoming Chinese satellites for all practical purposes. So, when the foreign minister says that it is not the West that is flooding your markets with cheap products, obviously it's a reference to China. It's something we've talked about for a long time now. But what I find really interesting is that this strong statement from India's External Affairs Minister not only signals a very distinct geopolitical and economic shift that has happened in recent times, but his choice of words, I think, is very interesting. When he says, the West is not the bad guy, we need to get over that syndrome. So do you think he felt the need to say that? Because for decades together, it is the Western countries that were painted as the villain, almost seen as, the part of the world that kept the rest of us poor. But now, Dr. Jaishankar is saying, no, it's not the West. The villain lies in another geography today.
Right. So Neha, if you look at world history, I think right up to Second World War, one could have blamed Western powers for colonization, for the poverty that resulted in many parts of the world. But I think we have been living in a changing world since at least the Second World War, where country after country has gained independence, and they have been free to create their own destinies. So I don't think West is a bad guy anymore at all. In fact, if you look at the way US has helped Japan rebuild after it unfortunately bombed Japan in the World War, then if you look at how Korea has been helped, even China has got a lot of help from US in terms of technology, in terms of manufacturing investment. So I think it is no longer the West, but there's a new axis which is emerging, led by China, which believes that it has been given a short, end of the stick, and therefore it's creating a situation where it's building a narrative of West versus us, where China is allegedly not getting its share of a global limelight or the respect or the power that it deserves, where its ambitions are of going back to an era where the old Chinese empire ruled pretty much like large parts of Asia. So now that is, I think, a ridiculous kind of a foreign policy approach for China to take, because we live in a different world today, and therefore to hark back to an historic kind of a situation and say, "Oh, we want to bring that back," that is, I think, fairly stupid. The unfortunate bit is China is actually, going ahead and conducting itself in such a manner which is creating a lot of global instability. It's I would even say that it's instigating some countries to go against the West so that it can benefit from the emerging turmoil, Neha. So that really is the unfortunate bit right now.
Absolutely. Not a day goes by when we do not discuss China's hegemony on this show. And our next story is also, in fact, from China, but on an entirely different issue, yet one that is important to all of us around the globe. Just how did the coronavirus originate? Where exactly did it stem from before wreaking havoc across the world, unleashing a once-in-a-century pandemic, changing our life as we knew it, and killing millions of people across the globe? Well, the answer to possibly the most critical question of our times remains elusive till date, thanks to the opacity and intransigence of Chinese authorities. The World Health Organization's chief, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has yet again urged China to offer more information on the origins of COVID-19. This comes as the World Health Body is contemplating sending a second team to China to probe the matter. The genesis of the pandemic remains unclear even 4 years after the first cases emerged in China's Wuhan. Speaking to Financial Times, the World Health Organization chief said, "We are pressing China to give us full access, and we are asking countries to raise this matter during their bilateral meetings to urge Beijing to cooperate with our investigation. We have already asked them in writing to give us information and are also willing to send a team if they allow us to do so." This comes as world leaders for the first time will discuss pandemic preparedness at high-level meetings during the UN General Assembly in New York next week. The WHO chief even said that he traveled all the way to Beijing in order to convince Chinese President Xi Jinping in January 2020 to allow the first COVID-19 mission of WHO experts inside their territory. No scientific consensus has emerged on the origins of the virus. The WHO boss said, reiterating that all options remain on the table. He said, "Unless we get evidence beyond reasonable doubt, we cannot just say this or that. We will get the answer. It's a matter of time." On his meeting with Xi Jinping, Dr. Ghebreyesus said, and I quote, "I went and met the Chinese president. The officials below him were not willing to allow us to send a team. So I had to travel to convince the president about why this was so important. On the origin study, since they're not giving us full access, we started discussions in private, and then when they refused to cooperate, we made it public. If we know the origin, then we can prevent the next pandemic. So it's science. It'll not be morally correct if we don't know what happened." He added, "The pandemic was politicized from the beginning, and there are still no answers for all those who have paid for this pandemic." Ever since the COVID virus spread and was declared a public health emergency of international concern by the World Health Organization in January 2020, the outbreak became a pandemic in just a few weeks by March that year and caused havoc on mankind, killing millions of people and leaving many more reeling under long COVID. The COVID-19 virus was first identified in Wuhan in China in December 2019, but came to light only by January 2020, sparking global concern. The prevailing theory suggests that it may have originated in a live animal market before rapidly spreading worldwide, claiming the lives of at least 7 million people. Since then, Numerous claims and counterclaims about the virus's origin have surfaced, with the WHO pushing for transparency. But the story doesn't end there. Allegations have now emerged regarding America's Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, and its role in the COVID-19 controversy. Now, some claim that several CIA analysts were paid to alter their views on the virus's origins. Stanford University professor Dr. Jayanta Bhattacharya has called for absolute transparency, stating just what was the CIA's role? What role did they have, and why was there any interest in covering up that fact? If these allegations are correct, it is shocking. Dr. Bhattacharya emphasized that the entire world deserves to know the truth, and that this issue transcends national security, becoming a matter of human rights and honesty. But even as the world continues to demand answers, the question is, will China oblige? It hasn't in all these years, as we know very well. Let's go back to Shri at this point. Shri, let's discuss this in two parts. We'll come to the allegations against the CIA or some of its analysts in a moment. But first, what Dr. Ghebreyesus has said, the WHO chief says we are contemplating sending yet another probe team to China, but they have to allow us to do so. We need full access. They haven't cooperated so far. It is no secret that China has, at every step of the way, done everything in its power to cover up the origins of the virus, which, as we know, originated in that country and unleashed havoc around the world, resulting in clearly a once-in-a-century pandemic taking 7 million lives, and yet 4 years down the road, we still have no answers. The question really is, what can the WHO do now to put pressure on China? How do you expect China to suddenly change its mind? It's not relented over the last 4 years. And honestly, has the international community done enough to actually get some answers out of China on this very critical issue?
So, Neha, it boggles my mind that a pandemic which has killed 7 million people, has cost the world $9 trillion. That's 3 times the GDP of India, $9 trillion in economic output, has not been investigated properly. It has not been allowed to be investigated properly by only one country, China. In fact, after the first reports broke out of this kind of a infection, of this kind of a pandemic in 2019, December, the doctor who blew the lid on this, who raised the alarm, saying that I'm seeing patients coming in with this sort of symptoms, and this seems, highly contagious. What did the Chinese government do? It just asked him to shut up. He was made to lie low. And then poor man died of COVID himself. Even after China knew that this was a highly contagious disease that they were dealing with, they did not tell the world, Neha. So as a result, thousands of Chinese were merrily traveling outside of China. People were coming into China. And that is the only reason why this contagious disease could spread so easily to other parts of the world and nearly shut down the world for repeatedly, not once but twice, but repeatedly it shut down the world. So Neha, it is shocking that China refused to collaborate, refused to allow a CDC, a WHO, or other European CDC to come in and look at the origin of the virus. So as a result, humanity will never know what really caused the COVID-19 pandemic. Was it, as China says, a zoonotic transmission from its fresh meat market in Hunan? Or was it actually a lab leak? Or was it even, as some have suggested, some conspiracy theorists have suggested, a bioweapon, which was probably being tested, and that went out of hand. So we will never know the reality, Neha. Very, very unfortunate. And I blame WHO, and I also blame the world community for this, because I don't think enough pressure was brought on China. 7 million people are killed, and we don't have enough sanctions being put on China for its behavior. That's utterly shocking to my mind. Now, WHO says that we will send another team. What will you do after 4 years? The lab has been completely cleaned. The market was cleaned on January 1st, 2020. Days after the incident happened. So what is WHO going to do going inside? They'll have nothing. It's like going into a crime scene 4 years later, figure out, to collect evidence. This is utter bullshit. I think WHO has completely failed. I think China owes it to the world to disclose what it knows, and I'm 100% sure it knows how the transmission really happened, how this completely went out of hand. So I think China owes it to the world to tell them with clarity, what really happened.
Well, China certainly owes it to the world, because this is not a matter that was at any point in time confined to China alone. It unleashed this pandemic on the world. I don't think there is a single person on this planet who remained unaffected by this planet, and that includes people like you and me. We've all paid a price in varying degrees for a pandemic that was unleashed on the world by China, which refuses to be accountable, which refuses to give us any answers. And you're quite right, the World Health Organization has indeed failed. All of us, because not only did it not put enough pressure on China to get the answers that we needed, but it also took the longest time, if you recall, Shri, to even declare it as a public health emergency. For the longest time, they kept playing it down, saying, it's nothing serious, we're keeping an eye on it, and next thing we knew, the entire world was under a lockdown. But now coming to the conspiracy theories. Yes, there are plenty of conspiracy theories about the origins. Was it a lab leak? Was it a bioweapon? I don't know if we'll ever know the answers, but there have also been conspiracy theories aplenty about whether there were enough people in positions of power, not just in China, but even outside of it, including in the United States, who knew what was going on and chose to look the other way. Now, I distinctly recall that there were allegations of this nature made even against somebody like Dr. Anthony Fauci, the chief medical advisor, former chief medical advisor to the US president, and at that time who was considered the foremost infectious diseases expert in the world and the COVID expert in the world. I remember interviewing him at the peak of the COVID pandemic in 2021. I asked him about those controversial emails that had surfaced and which were being referred to. And at the time when he was accused of being part of a cover-up, he rubbished all those allegations. But now come these claims that there were CIA analysts who were paid to alter their views on the origins of the virus. What more do we know about this, Shri? Is there any credence whatsoever to these claims that are being made, or is it just one of the million conspiracy theories that have been doing the rounds over the last 4 years since the pandemic erupted?
So Neha, right now these are just allegations. I don't think unless the United States government investigates this and comes to a conclusion, I don't think we'll ever know if these allegations are really true in terms of CIA analysts covering up. But Neha, let's ask ourselves, why did so many conspiracy theories come about in the first place? What was the need? It came about only because the opacity of China refusing to tell the world what really went on, or sharing any kind of data which would allow scientists from around the world, not just American scientists, but European scientists, Indian scientists, or Latin American scientists from around the world to come together and study the data and come to a conclusion. It is China's single-minded refusal to share any kind of data on this, which led to the emergence of these hundreds of conspiracy theories. Neha, what China should have done if it wanted to kill all these theories is simply to have come out and said, no, this is what happened. This was actually a zoonotic transmission that happened from our wet market in Wuhan, and this is the data that we have to prove it. So kill the theory. But China refused to do it because at some level it also gained from these confusion, these conflicting theories come about, because you would never really know if China was really to blame, if the market, if the regulations, the market were lax, if the rules regarding keeping live animals or avoiding selling of certain kinds of meat, if those rules were violated. So China essentially doesn't want to take the blame. So that is why it has kept all this data away from the world, and it enjoys all these theories, conflicting theories often that come, and then you'll have these other conspiracy theories being floated from time to time, saying that, oh, this agency did the cover-up, this other agency did the cover-up. But I think the biggest cover-up was done is by China, no one else, Neha.
There is no doubt about that. But then again, the question that we need to ask is, will China ever be held accountable? Shri, let's move on to our next story, which is from Europe. But this one too has a China connect. As a burgeoning energy crisis looms, raising huge concern among European Union leaders, a confidential paper obtained by news agency Reuters has revealed that by 2030, the European Union could find itself as dependent on China for lithium-ion batteries and fuel cells as it once was on Russia for energy. The EU has been grappling with the spectre of foreign dependency, and this time it's not about energy imports but about essential components for green energy and technology. The paper, prepared for EU leaders and set to be discussed in Spain on the 5th of October, has set alarm bells ringing. The paper says, and I quote, without implementing strong measures, the European energy ecosystem could have a dependency on China by 2030 of a different nature, but with a similar severity from the one it had on Russia before the invasion of Ukraine. According to the European Commission, in 2021, the year before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the EU took more than 40% of its total gas consumption, 27% of oil imports and 46% of coal imports from Russia. Europe's ambitious goal of achieving net zero carbon dioxide emissions by 2050
so many thanks
hinges
to all of them
on green
for such
energy
a
sources like
riveting
wind and solar
conversation.
power.
Line
However, these sources are intermittent, and to
so
bridge
many
the
thanks
gaps,
to all of
Europe
them
needs
for
energy
such
storage solutions. While emphasizing the urgency of finding sustainable sources for these crucial components, the paper states this will skyrocket our demand for lithium-ion batteries, fuel cells and electrolyzers, which is expected to multiply between 10 and 30 times in the coming years.
For
but
all
it's not just green energy where the European Union faces potential vulnerabilities. This paper highlights concerns in the digital tech space as well. For the demand for digital devices surges, as the demand surges, Europe's reliance on foreign sources for vital tech components becomes apparent. The document says, forecasts suggest that the demand for digital devices
unless
such
that
as
stops,
sensors,
we
drones,
shall
data
always be
servers,
shocked
storage
by the
equipment
way
and data transmission
are
networks will rise sharply in this decade. EU leaders are now confronted with a pressing issue: how to reduce their dependency on China and diversify their sources, potentially turning towards Africa and Latin America. The consequences of inaction could be dire. This concern
only because
stems
that's
from
how it works,
worries
ladies
about
and
China's
gentlemen.
growing
Unless
global
that stops,
assertiveness and
we shall
economic
always be
weight.
shocked by the way
The paper goes on to say by 2030, this foreign dependency could seriously hinder the productivity gains that the European industry and service sector urgently require and could impede the modernization of agricultural systems essential to addressing climate change. As Europe grapples with the risk of over-reliance on China for essential green energy and tech components, the stakes are pretty high. EU leaders are set to deliberate on strategies to mitigate these risks and ensure a secure, sustainable and resilient future. The European Commission has been trotting out what it calls a de-risking strategy, ostensibly in pursuit of developing a resilient economy for the 27-member bloc that would be less reliant on China when it comes to critical technology. But will those measures be enough? In response, China's Premier Li Qiang has warned countries against attempts to politicize their economies. Speaking at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting of the new champions in China, Li said the invisible barriers put up by some people in recent years are becoming widespread and pushing the world into fragmentation and even confrontation. We should oppose the politicization of economic issues and work together to keep global industrial and supply chains stable, smooth and secure. Okay, let's go back to Shri for more on this. Shri, of course, every time China feels its interests are under threat, it starts lecturing the world. And it seems to be doing that in this case as well, calling it politicization of the economies. But China's protestations apart, put this issue into perspective for us. At a time when European Union keeps talking about pursuing a de-risking strategy, which is a euphemism really for reducing its reliance on countries like China, it seems like it's actually moving in the opposite direction if the contents of this report are to be believed.
Right. So Neha, first of all, I don't really understand what the report means by saying that we will become dependent on China by 2013.
They already are.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. 6 out of top 10 battery manufacturers around the world are from China. China has capacity of 890 gigawatt hours. of EV production, which is almost 80% of world production. Between US and Europe, they have only 20% of the production capacity. And this scenario is not going to change until 2030 because China is also investing in increasing its capacity. So this is, EV is one area, Neha, where China, we have to give them credit. We have to give China credit. They got their act, bang on. They were 10 to 15 years, ahead of all other countries in identifying EV as an important emerging industry. And then, they were also blessed with the supply of the rare earth materials that is required to create these batteries that go into these batteries. And the other thing they did was also to capture mining capacity in other parts of the world, rare earth capacity in other parts of the world. So there is some credit that we have to give to China as far as getting its EV, strategy in place. So now Europe has woken up to the fact, and US has also woken up to the fact that, we need to go green, but all the batteries that we need in our cars, that will be green cars, are going to come from China. So if Europe and US are to replace the current production from China, Neha, they have to invest almost $200 billion. Now, even if you make the investment, these are not capacities that can be created overnight. So as far as 2030, I don't think the world has any option but to rely on China for battery capacity. Neha, that's very, very clear. I think there is some lesson for India also. And I think right now we account for about just 0.2% of global EV battery capacity. India needs to start looking at its own, EV future and see how much of our green commitment is going to come from these EV cars. That is why I think in the interim, if you look at what happened at G20, we did not set any kind of goals on fossil fuel reduction on, green gas emission. So China has completely overwhelmed the EV industry, and it's going to be very hard for Europe and US to displace it at least till 2030, Neha. That's very, very clear.
All right. Shri, anyone watching Global Lens tonight would think we are obsessed with China. So with due apologies to my viewers, I move on to our next story, which is also about China. China and Russia are expected to step up their strategic coordination as China's foreign minister and top diplomat Wang Yi has kicked off a 4-day visit to Russia for security talks ahead of a possible visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin to Beijing next month. China's foreign ministry announced on Monday that Wang, the Chinese foreign minister and a Politburo member who heads the Communist Party's Foreign Affairs Office, will be in Russia until Thursday for the annual Strategic Security Consultation meetings. As close neighbors and comprehensive strategic partners, China and Russia have maintained close communication on major strategic and global issues of common interest. And during Wang Yi's trip, the two sides will hold in-depth communication on important topics related to the strategic security interests of the two countries. That's what the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said. The visit comes at the invitation of Nikolai Patrushev, the head of Russia's Security Council, who co-chairs the bilateral strategic security consultation mechanism. Wang Yi is expected to lay the groundwork, as we said, for a possible visit by Putin to Beijing, where he would join Chinese President Xi Jinping in the Third Belt and Road Summit in the Chinese capital next month. It would be Putin's first visit to China since he invaded Ukraine. Wang Yi's Russia trip was confirmed by Beijing only hours after he wrapped up what China described as open, substantive and constructive strategic negotiations with Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor. According to readouts from the US and China, the two sides spoke about relations between the two countries, Russia's war in Ukraine and tensions over Taiwan, which has emerged as one of the most dangerous potential flashpoints between the two powers. Wang Yi will also meet with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, to discuss Ukraine and Asia-Pacific stability and security. The Foreign Ministry said the strengthening of cooperation on the world stage with emphasis on the joint work at the UN, BRICS, the SCO, the G20, APEC and other forums will be highlighted. Now, this week's trip is Wang's second visit to Moscow since February, and it follows North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia over the past week. Beijing and Moscow, which share a mutual distrust of Washington, have appeared to play up an image of unity. China has seen its rivalry with the US grow increasingly confrontational, while Russia has faced mounting pressure from the West since its invasion of Ukraine. When Putin rolled out the red carpet for Kim Jong-un at the Vostochny Cosmodrome rocket launch facility in the Russian Far East, the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister held a meeting with the Russian ambassador in Beijing. Last month, Beijing sent Defense Chief Li Shangfu to Moscow, where he spoke at an international security conference and met with his Russian counterpart Sergei Shoigu. They pledged to promote cooperation between the two armed forces, including on military technology, and to support each other's core interests. Beijing and Moscow began their bilateral strategic security mechanism in the early 2000s. Since then, senior diplomats of the two countries have met almost every year. All right, so how significant is this? Let's find out from our in-house China expert, Shri. Shri, I'm sure you are a China expert by now, thanks to the fact that you have to hold fort on China every single night on Global Lens. So tell us, how significant is Wang Yi's visit to Russia, and the fact that it's widely expected that Putin is going to travel to Beijing next month, and it won't be the first time that he'll be there to, in a sense, express support and solidarity with Russia's Belt and Road Initiative. He's done that at least twice in the past. Of course, in global diplomacy and I guess in other spheres too, they say enemy is my friend. And while this relationship is not entirely new, but in the new geopolitical scenario that's emerging, you could very safely say that is the game that's playing out here, with Russia and China getting closer and closer by the day.
So Neha, the first thing to remember is that real diplomacy is never done under the glare of cameras. And yet, if China and Russia and North Korea have chosen to put on their new blooming romance in front of cameras for the whole world to see, it's largely because of the message they want to send out to the world. Real diplomacy happens behind closed doors, and the world gets to know only after the effects of those deals start emerging on the global stage. So this is a lot of public posturing that's happening between these countries, a messaging being sent out to Western powers that, this new axis is forming, and be careful that we are coming together. We are not someone you can just, push over and get your way with. So that's a very clear signal that these three countries, China, Russia, and North Korea to a smaller extent, but essentially China and Russia are trying to send to the world. So that said, Neha, there is also no doubt that Xi Jinping's pet project, the Belt and Road Initiative, has come under a tremendous pressure, both within China and also among the participants, because a lot of these projects which have been executed are turning out to be, basically wasteful projects, white elephants, very, very difficult to, execute and maintain. A lot of countries that signed up thinking that China is going to cough up the money, but China is now turning around and telling, for example, our, neighbor Nepal, it's telling Nepal that you figure out where the money is going to come from. Now, for many of these countries, these billion-dollar projects are a very significant part of the GDP. There is no way they can raise resources to execute these projects. So in some sense, Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative is facing an existential crisis, and it needs new supporters. And the only large supporter who can, step up to Xi Jinping this time is Vladimir Putin of Russia. And this whole coming together of Russia and China actually has been going on even before the start of the war. When Putin was at the Chinese Winter Olympic Games, they had announced an unlimited friendship partner between the two countries. So this is in continuation of that same thread. But ultimately, these are two countries, which have their own set of ambitions. While they might come together momentarily to send out a signal to take on the West, but I think eventually, Neha, they will be driven by their own concerns and their own priorities. And for them to forge any meaningful relationship that lasts decades is going to be very tough. One, because both the leaders may not be there for another 20 years. So that is a big question. But right now, it's a whole lot of posturing that's happening, messaging being sent out to the Western countries that we are together. So don't think you can mess with us that easily, Neha.
All right, Shri, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but you'll have to agree that as of today, Putin and Xi are definitely the new BFFs. All right, since I'm moving on to my next story now, Shri, any guesses where it's from?
Don't tell me it's China.
Well, you're a genius, aren't you, Shri? All right, let's get you our next story from China. Is Chinese President Xi Jinping's security-related paranoia now permeating the lives of ordinary Chinese nationals? That seems to be the case, going by the latest reports. Xi Jinping's security measures are causing a stir as ordinary citizens are being turned into spy hunters. This shift is raising concerns both domestically and internationally. As students return to Beijing's top universities this fall, they're being met with an unexpected addition to their curriculum, a crash course on how to spot spies. Propaganda campaigns have been launched around campuses with videos and national security themed events becoming the new norm. At Tsinghua University, faculty screens displayed videos instructing teachers and students on how to become a defense line against perceived foreign threats. Meanwhile, the Beijing University of Technology hosted a garden party with a national security theme, all orchestrated by China's spy agency. Even at Beihang University, which faces US sanctions due to its military links, students were asked to participate in an interactive training game called Who's the Spy? The Ministry of State Security introduced this initiative on its new WeChat account, asking, in what special way will the college students around you reinvigorate national security? The push comes after Xi Jinping chaired a National Security Council meeting in May that stressed the importance of extreme case scenario thinking, a phrase the ruling party had previously reserved for describing natural disaster preparedness. China has since passed a new anti-spy law, accusing consulting firms of working for overseas intelligence agencies, and warned that foreign forces are infiltrating the energy sector. Does Xi have a good reason to unite the public around a common threat? Well, China is locked in an ideological battle with the United States that's weighing on its economy, just as the Asian giant enters a slowdown that risks stoking another wave of social unrest. Last year, students led rare nationwide protests calling for the end of COVID-0 and, in some cases, the removal of the Chinese president. This move by the Chinese government is causing concern. Kaya Drinhosen, head of Politics and Society program at the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Berlin, has said, at the time of economic pressure, there are quite obvious concerns at the top leadership. Using collective fear as a way to build political and social cohesion is a very dangerous game to play. The Ministry of State Security, China's main intelligence agency, has traditionally operated discreetly, but recent developments have seen it taking a more public stance. It has joined WeChat, providing regular updates on its efforts to secure national security, including guidance for primary school students on responsible social media use. The shift towards public visibility coincided with CIA Director William Burns' statement about rebuilding the spy network in China. The Ministry of State Security also detailed 2 cases of Chinese officials detained for providing information to the CIA, a rare disclosure from an agency that typically keeps its arrests private. The consequences of this shift are raising concerns amongst citizens. China's history, particularly during the Cultural Revolution, includes instances where the public was encouraged to report on one another, leading to severe consequences. Now, ordinary people are being urged to question their neighbors' knowledge of pop culture to gauge their patriotism. Shenna Gratens, Associate Professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin, says, and I quote, encouraging citizens to spy on each other would have damaging consequences for overall governance in China. It can lead to false reporting, which means they're working from increasingly bad information. Evidently, China's push to involve ordinary citizens in national security measures is generating a wave of mistrust, both domestically and internationally. Okay, going back to Shri for more on this story. Shri, spy games are nothing new. Multiple Hollywood movies have been made on this. I mean, I guess nothing else really explains the popularity of the James Bond franchise. But, you know, the question really is, while yes, dictators are known to be paranoid, especially when it comes to matter of either national security or their personal security, but China seems to be taking things to a completely bizarre level, encouraging young people, young Chinese to spy on each other, to practically turn on each other. What's going on here? And clearly there is merit in the argument being made by those who say this is very dangerous for Chinese society itself.
So Neha, police state is a term that came with the communist regime. So for the old communist, governments, using police was an integral part of their statecraft. That's how they kept tabs on their citizens, especially the ones who were not happy with the government or could potentially foment trouble. Foment trouble in the sense of asking for democracy. So that was the definition of trouble. So anyone who was seen as anti-regime, these were people kept under strict watch by the state police. So East Germany had Stasi, which would maintain detailed information diaries on people that they suspected were, anti-government. So in China, obviously this also prevails. But China has also adopted high technology. Let us not forget. They have a lot of CCTV cameras which are deployed in cities where, with face recognition technology, and there are citizen scores that are given to each citizen. And that score determines your ability to access government services, even simple things like passport, vaccination, or housing, or even a loan. So this is essentially an absolute strategy of China, how it controls people. But this is a master stroke, because what is this whole concept of citizen vigilante going to do now? It's going to turn people against each other. So now I'm going to become my neighbor's enemy, and I'm going to keep a watch on him. While the reality is China as a country is facing severe economic problems. Growth is slowing, youth is unemployed, and the going looks very tough. So when all these major problems are happening, how do you distract people from the real issues, and keep them preoccupied? This is how you do it. You say that, okay, your neighbor is your real enemy. He's spying on you. He's like, he's the cause of your problems. He's the one you need to be careful of. So by creating this and by doing it officially with a government sanction, this is absolutely shocking. But this is what China is doing. And it's not, it's an opportunity for it to create a distraction among its people and turn friendly neighbors into enemies, so that the Communist Party and its leaders can continue to rule China while they bicker among each other, while they become more distrustful of each other, and then they become suspicious of each other, Neha. So that is a state strategy by which you control the people. And China is doing it at a mass scale. That's the only difference now.
Well, these spy games certainly are assuming very dangerous proportions in China. All right, Shri, I promise you that our next story on Global Lens is the last one from China. All right, in a concerning escalation, Taiwan has reported the detection of over 100 Chinese warplanes and 9 naval vessels in its vicinity. This marks a recent high in military activities near Taiwan. The Ministry of National Defense in Taipei released a statement describing the situation as posing severe challenges to the security across the Taiwan Strait and the region. Taiwanese authorities issued a statement saying between the mornings of the 17th and the 18th of September, the Ministry of National Defense had detected a total of 103 Chinese aircraft, which was a recent high and has posed severe challenges to the security across the Taiwan Strait and the region. The situation has raised concerns not only in Taiwan but globally. Beijing's persistent military harassment of Taiwan has been a source of tension in the entire region. Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense issued a stern warning stating that such actions by China could lead to a sharp spike in tensions and worsen regional security. The ministry said continued military harassment can easily lead to a sharp spike in tensions and worsen regional security. It called on China to immediately stop such destructive unilateral actions. The recent surge in Chinese military activity near Taiwan comes on the heels of heightened tensions. Of the total number of warplanes detected, 40 crossed the so-called median line of the Taiwan Strait that separates the island from China and entered its southwest and southeast air defense identification zone. Last week, Taipei reported increased incursions by Chinese warplanes and naval vessels, particularly after the transit of US and Canadian ships through the Taiwan Strait. The international community is closely monitoring these developments. Japan's defense ministry has reported its navy's detection of 6 Chinese ships sailing through waters south of Miyako-jima Island, east of Taiwan. Additionally, jets and helicopters were observed taking off and landing, further raising concerns about the scope of China's military exercises in the Western Pacific. Beijing, which claims Taiwan is an inseparable part of its territory, has increasingly ignored the median line, sending sorties closer to Taiwan in what is known as grey zone tactics intended to exhaust and intimidate Taiwan's smaller military. China has said for years that it seeks peaceful reunification with Taiwan, but it will take it by force if necessary. In recent years, ties between the two sides have broken down following the election of Tsai Ing-wen, whose Democratic Progressive Party is seen as less favorable to Beijing. And as China-US ties have deteriorated, cross-strait tensions have risen sharply. Okay, let's go back to Shri to understand this story better. Shri, no matter how many warnings you issue to China, clearly China is not listening, and there is no end to the Chinese aggression in the region.
That's right, Neha. This is a deliberate provocation by China. Obviously, it's something China makes it a habit to do every now and then to show who's the big boss in that region. So whether it is the map altering territories of countries, claiming them to be China's, integral part of China, or these routine sorties, aircraft sorties, which cross into international, borders of other countries, the maritime border. So this is something China does routinely to provoke and to create instability in these regions. But the good thing going for Taiwan is that the US administration, President Joe Biden, has unequivocally said that they are behind China and behind Taiwan, and China must not do anything which goes against the status quo, of what has been agreed internationally. So we can expect these kind of incursions, these kind of sorties to happen, but as long as it doesn't come into something significant, I think there will be a way to manage it. My best hope is that there is no kind of an invasion that takes place of Taiwan, although it cannot be ruled out entirely, Neha, because a lot of experts believe that after what Putin has done to Ukraine, China may well turn around and want to invade Taiwan as well. But I hope it doesn't come. So this is basically China testing the world's patience and seeing how much of this troublemaking will the world take. And then maybe one day it will decide what it wants to do about Taiwan. Although internally there are reports that the Chinese military has been told to prepare for a warlike scenario with Taiwan, Neha.
Right, and China has made no secret of its intent. It has publicly and repeatedly said, we will take Taiwan by force if necessary. All right, you can finally heave a sigh of relief, Shri, because our final story on Global Lens is not from China. It is from where you are. Indian-American entrepreneur and Republican presidential aspirant Vivek Ramaswamy, who's been grabbing headlines both in the US and globally, has ignited a fresh debate over the H-1B visa program. Ramaswamy, who's previously used the program himself 29 times, is now vowing to reform it if elected as the President of the United States next year. In a recent interview to Politico, an American media outlet, Vivek Ramaswamy did not mince his words when discussing the H-1B visa program. He referred to it as indentured servitude and expressed his intent to gut the lottery-based system, replacing it with a meritocratic admission process. These remarks have raised eyebrows, especially amongst Indian IT professionals who rely heavily on the H-1B program for employment opportunities in the United States. Ramaswamy's stance echoes the tough approach taken by former President Donald Trump during his 2016 campaign, although Trump later softened his stance on the program after taking office. Ramaswamy's remarks have not gone unnoticed, and some have questioned the consistency of his position, given that his own companies have utilized the H-1B program on 29 occasions, as we just pointed out. Now, responding to that very criticism, Ramaswamy took to social media and argued, and I quote, Politico tried to play gotcha by saying, I want to gut the H-1B system even though my companies have used it to hire foreign graduates from top US universities. Well, US energy sector regulations are badly broken, but I still use water and electricity. Turns out I actually understand the things that I want to reform. The foreign visa lottery is senseless, and the H-1B regime is a form of indentured servitude that is a product of corporate lobbying. I will finally fix it. The H-1B visa program is a non-immigrant visa that allows US companies to employ foreign workers, particularly in roles that require theoretical or technical expertise. It's long been a source of controversy, with arguments ranging from its importance in attracting global talent to allegations of abuse and exploitation. Vivek Ramaswamy's bold, even if controversial, stance on this issue has reignited the debate on immigration policies in the United States. With the presidential race heating up and Ramaswamy in contention alongside other notable Republican candidates, the future of the H-1B program is now a topic of significant interest for both the American public and the international community, not to mention Indian techies. All right, Sri, coming back to you. Now, he says, I will finally fix it. For that, he'll have to first get elected to the White House. I'm not sure that's happening in 2024. But the very fact that a man, you know, who is seen as being of Indian descent, who's suddenly been catapulted into limelight in recent weeks in the US presidential race, is now talking about fixing, reforming the H-1B visa program, which, let's face it, impacts Indians more than perhaps any other country or community in the world. What should be made of it?
So, Neha, let's get one thing clear. I think the US economies, especially the high-tech industries' reliance on skilled foreign workers is not going to go away. So I don't think Vivek Ramaswamy is even talking about doing away with the H-1B visas. I don't think that's what he's talking about. He's essentially talking about addressing certain problems that plague this H-1B visa system. So let me talk to you about what are the problems that currently, plague the system. The problems come from one thing, which is the cap. So there's a cap of 65,000 H-1B visas that can be issued annually, every year, Neha. And there's a 20,000 extra visas that can be issued to foreign workers with a master's degree from a US university. So, but the problem is every year, at least 3 to 4 times the number of people want to apply for H-1B. So what happens? The US immigration system has no choice but then to run some sort of a lottery, where what Ramaswamy is pointing out to the fact is that the lottery doesn't focus on the absolute merit. Absolutely true. Because when you're running a lottery, after you've done the initial filtration and you say, okay, out of, let's say, 300,000 applicants, I'm going to vet only 150. Now, out of these 150, 65,000 will get. So you're running a lottery for these 150. And you don't know if someone who's much more qualified, who potentially could greater value to the US economy, is getting weeded out in this lottery system. So that's the meritocracy that Vivek Ramaswamy wants to ensure the H-1B system takes, and not rely on a lottery system. That's not inherently a wrong approach to my mind, Neha, because there is absolutely nothing wrong in a country trying to bring the best possible talent into its own workforce. I think that's how it should be. Right now, there's a lot of consternation that's happening among the undocumented, immigrants who are crossing into U.S. border. Now there are some democratic, leaders who are asking for work visas to be given to these people. Now, unlike the H-1B category, which is like highly skilled, where the average pay, is like 120,000 and above. These are all, low skilled workers who could potentially impact the average American as well. Right. So I don't think there is anything wrong in trying to fix the system, but will he be able to cut it in the sense of like removing it? I don't think that's going to happen, because the US tech industry pretty much depends on these foreign workers, Neha.
Absolutely. So he's taken a nuanced position on this issue, but I have to say he sounds more and more like Donald Trump with every passing day. On that note, Sri, thank you so much for joining us on this special China edition of Global Lens.
My pleasure, Neha. Thank you for having me.
See you again tomorrow. All right, we've completely run out of time. If you have been, thanks so much for watching Global Lens. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.